Welcome to Liminal Radio, a niche horror podcast. I'm Gray.
And I'm Hatter, and thank you for joining us on the Station Between Stations, where we explore the best horror rabbit holes.
On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the brain-eating mindless hordes.
Oh, you mean politicians?
No, the other ones.
Fortnite players?
No, the other ones.
Oh, zombies!
That would be the ones. We're going to be talking about zombies, and specifically talking about how to survive a zombie apocalypse, and what we can learn from media that will teach us how.
Which is quite a bit, and one of the main things it's taught me is, in most cases, you're not going to survive it.
And that's such a cool thing to bring up, is that, remember, if most of the world dies, you're probably most. So if we're talking that 10% of the world survives to live in the zombie apocalypse, most likely you were part of the 90. But assuming that you get to make that final cut and become part of the 10% trying to survive the zombie apocalypse, we're going to talk about how to make it as long as you possibly can.
Which is really the end goal. I mean, surviving on a long-term basis is really not an option. You're really just trying to exist for as long as you possibly can.
That's also true in the zombie apocalypse, because that's just a life lesson. You're not going to survive forever. You're just trying to live as well as you can for as long as you can. That's literally all any of us are doing.
Yep, pretty much. So here's my question, Gray. To you, what makes something a zombie?
I love this question. For one, I have kind of a meta answer, which is zombie is less of a creature and more of a job that a creature does in a story. So we might have certain creatures that we might not traditionally think of as zombies, but they're doing zombie work in a zombie apocalypse style story. But even at that, it's not just what purpose they fulfill in the story. We also have to look at certain qualities, because they kind of have to have a few qualities in order to really be a zombie. One of the first ones is it has to have once been human. If you can have a creature that was never human that kind of functions like a zombie, but it's not really going to feel like a zombie, or it's not going to be a zombie, even if it kind of feels like one. An example of that I would throw out is the aliens from A Quiet Place. In some ways, it's a little bit like a zombie apocalypse, but they were never human, definitely not a zombie. Another element would be infectious, because a big danger of zombieism is that you could become a zombie. So if there's no way for a human to become a whatever, it's definitely not a zombie.
And let me tell you this, humans are very good in infectious situations. When it comes to, plagues and disease, they're very, very good at it. Can you tell I'm being sarcastic?
Well, and that's one of the things that's always covered in zombie apocalypse stories, is that humans are really, really bad at containing infectious diseases. There's always that one person who knows they've been bit, gets on the airplane anyway, and transmit the zombie virus to an entirely new part of the world. And that's in no way been reflected in current history, and we're not even going to talk about it because that's not even relevant in any way.
Yeah, certainly we've never seen an infectious disease be poorly handled and cause a lot more deaths than it needed to and a lot more illness than it needed to. That's never happened.
Okay, wise guys. What about the zombie crows from Resident Evil? I feel this needs to be addressed.
Oh, and the dogs.
Bringing up Resident Evil actually brings us up to something we're going to get to in just a second, which is the different types of zombies. We're going to discuss those, and Resident Evil brings up one of my favorite categories of zombies. But before we get to that, I do think there's a couple more categories for something to be a zombie, or a couple of more requirements for something to be a zombie, which is they do need to be mostly mindless. If they can plan, if they can think, if they're intelligent, that's really not a zombie. That can be a very cool, scary villain, but not a zombie.
So kind of like the creatures in The Last Man on Earth. They're kind of like zombies, but they can think and plan.
So they're really too smart to be a classic zombie. Another one is some sort of carnivorousness, some sort of feeding off humans, whether it's eating human flesh, eating human brains, whatever. They kind of have to seek out and want to attack humans. Otherwise, again, that's just going to be kind of an environmental hazard, not really a very good zombie. And sort of the last qualifier isn't necessary, but generally, if you're going to have a zombie apocalypse, you need a whole bunch of them. You need something that exists in a horde. If you only have one or two zombies, that's a very different story than a true zombie apocalypse style story.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes we get creatures like, going back to Resident Evil, you've got things like the Nemesis or the Mr. X Tyrant that is nearly indestructible, will chase you through the entire game, It's not a zombie, but it does tend to go hand in hand with zombies. We do see larger, harder to destroy creatures in a lot of fiction like that.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons why is because Resident Evil zombies belong to the third category of zombies. And the categories of zombies are your fast infected style zombies. Think 28 Days Later. This is going to be something that has all the capabilities of a very angry human and is probably about as easy to kill as a very angry human. You know, bullets, bleeding. It's still a biologically functioning human. So it's sort of like just pissed off humans are the antagonist. The second category is going to be your undead shambler. This is the classic Night of the Living Dead zombie. They're going to tend to be harder to put down because they are animated through some unnatural processes that keep them alive even though they should already be dead. The third category is the mutant zombie, and that's where Resident Evil comes in. Mutant zombies can also be damn near anything. They're going to be the least zombie-looking or feeling zombies. That's where you're going to occasionally get your zombie crows, your zombie dogs, your giant monsters with attack tongues. A more recent example of that is the Korean series Sweet Home, which has some of the most interesting mutant zombies where every single zombie they have is unique. You could even argue that they might not be zombies, but I think they do tick all the appropriate boxes. They are just so different. That also has one of the most interesting factors of what causes these zombies. In Sweet Home, it's not a virus. It's not a mysterious radiation. It's actually a spiritual disease. And I find that really fascinating.
I like that too, personally. I might have to check this out. Make everyone mad at me right now, but I'm hoping that it's available in a dub because I don't like doing subtitles. Come get me.
And it is available in dub, so actually quite good and has very good English voice acting.
This is good. Now, another thing I want to bring up about mutant zombies, particularly with Resident Evil, and why I like mutant zombies the best, is as we've implied, they can be very versatile. They can be shamblers, they can be fast, and Resident Evil actually has both. In the very first game, you see zombies that if they die, they'll lie dormant for a while, and the virus will continue to move through their body, and it'll rebuild them. So their blood vessels pop and they turn red, and they start running instead of just walking. They call them Crimson Heads, which, in retrospect is kind of a dumb name, but they're still pretty cool. And when I played the remake of Resident Evil 1 where they first appear, I didn't have any guides, any internet guidance. I was just playing, and I walked by the zombie. I'm like, wow, the bodies stay behind. That's so cool. And then it popped back up and started running at me. I'm like, that's not cool. That's not cool. But it is nice because we get more variety,
Well, all three of these categories have their own strengths and weaknesses, and one of the massive strengths of the mutant zombie is if you're using mutant zombies in your story, that means you can have everything. You can, in that story, have shamblers, have infected, have weird mutant things that are 10 feet tall, or have laser tongues, or, whatever you want.
Ew, laser tongues.
I want a laser tongue.
You are not allowed to have a laser tongue. I'm putting my foot down.
I'm not allowed to have anything that could destroy things very easily, all right? There's court orders about that.
And one of the interesting things about these three categories is how you kill these zombies, because, of course, this episode is about how to survive a zombie apocalypse, and the important thing about that, or one of the important things you're going to need to be able to do, is kill zombies. Now, you're infected, in some ways, are the easiest. They're still a biological human. Everything that kills a biological human will kill them. They can die from bleeding, they can die from cold, they can die from starvation. That's actually one of the things in 28 Days Later, pointing out that these human zombies who are just infected humans eventually are just going to die, and then it will be safe to return to normal life. That's one of the big upshots at the end of 28 Days Later. The shambling corpses, the true undead zombies, are going to depend from franchise to franchise, but they're usually the classic head and dead. They're the ones you either have to chop the head off, destroy the brain, headshots. That's going to be more the ones that you have to kill in that classic zombie way. Mutants, again, the great thing about mutant zombies, could be anything. You could have different mutant zombies that need to be killed in different ways. You could have different mutant, different classifications of mutant that have different weaknesses. So mutants are incredibly varied. To actually go back to Sweet Home, one of the problems with their mutant zombies is you can't really kill them. Like one of the mutants, and the thing is they just keep adapting, one of the mutant creatures in Sweet Home gets his head chopped off at about the nose level with only one ear left. His eyes are completely gone. So the one ear becomes huge and he begins hunting by sound. So you can have these really weird vulnerabilities and invulnerabilities with mutant zombies.
And the interesting thing about going back to Resident Evil and mutant zombies, it's not really the zombies, but the big creatures tend to adapt very well. Like if you watch Nemesis, he completely mutates his whole body several times, as does William Birkin. But, I hate to be a nitpicky guy, but if that happened in real life and your cellular structure was shifting that quickly, you'd produce so much heat you'd catch on fire. But, that's neither here nor there. And another interesting fact regarding Sweet Home is that the original Resident Evil was actually, when they were in the process of working on it, was planned to be a remake of the NES game by the title of Sweet Home. I'm sure the two are not related, but just a cool fact.
Although I almost wonder if it could be, because Sweet Home is a Korean zombie film, or a zombie series, and I wonder if the inspiration for it could have, or at least the inspiration for the title, could have been this older game. So I don't know if it's connected. Could be, but it's an interesting factoid anyway.
I'll have to look into that. Maybe we'll do a short on confirming or denying it.
So stay tuned, guys, on our short videos on YouTube, because we may actually do a checkup on this to see if we're actually correct on it.
It's something we should make a habit of. If we're wrong about something, we should definitely take accountability for that. But that's a problem for Tuesday, Matt and Gray.
Those guys will handle it. They're fine. I'm not worried about them.
Yeah, me neither.
So, Hatter, I think the next thing we want to talk about is where zombies come from, because, again, that's going to be a major factor in figuring out how to survive them.
Absolutely. Well, their genesis, if you will, is usually what's going to determine what their weaknesses are and what kind of zombie they are. And we've got a few origins listed here that tend to be pretty common. Of course, there's a viral infection.
And the viral infection is really interesting because it can lead to either the infected zombies, like in 28 Days Later, or it can lead to mutagenic zombies, like in Resident Evil.
Exactly. And a viral infection seems to be the most common thing that causes things to turn into zombies. We talked about SCP in the web horror episode, of course. They have their own zombie infection, which is actually what they refer to as a free prion. I don't know how you say the word. But what that is an abnormally folded protein that grows in the brain, usually caused by, strangely enough, in real life, people eating brains. The chemicals in the blood and the brain cause these abnormally folded proteins to form and affects their brain in such ways as usually causing them to get what they call the sleeping sickness, which is where, they become full body paralyzed. Once in a while, they'll shoot up and start laughing, which is terrifying beyond all belief. But anyway, back to SCP, a free prion. I can't remember the exact wording they use, but it's a prion that just exists and can infect you like a virus. So I thought that was an interesting take. Usually it's something biological, an infection of some kind, and that seems to be the most common one.
And to elaborate on the prion disease, most people are familiar with at least one prion disease, which is mad cow disease, which is, again, what happens whenever a cow ingests brain matter from another cow, or sometimes even meat. It can exist in the meat, usually in the brain matter, and it's being passed along that way, usually due to some very weird farming practices. And that's the neurological prion disease that you hear most about, that and also chronic wasting disease in deer.
Yeah, I would have to do a little more research on the prions, but as I understand it, it's often from consuming blood, often brain matter, but blood seems to be one of the more common ones as well.
Although an interesting weird factoid about chronic wasting disease in deer is that most people are probably familiar with, at this point, at least if you follow horror on the internet, the idea of not deer, which is the idea that there are these creepy creatures out that whenever you see them, this is almost a creepypasta kind of vibe, more of an internet urban legend side type of thing, that there are creatures that look like deer, but when they get closer, you notice they're weird, their mouths have teeth, or they stand up on their hind legs, and they're just these creepy things that look like deer but are not deer, and usually the implication that they are dangerous or predatory or whatever. When in reality, usually it's just a deer that is infected with chronic wasting disease, which causes all sorts of weird neurological and physical symptoms. So it's kind of interesting that that ties back into other horror things we've talked about with your creepypastas and not deer.
Exactly. Prion, I don't know how you say the word, but I know I'm afraid of it. Next we had on the list, of course, Resident Evil. That's another viral infection. The Dead series, as in dawn, day, and night. That was, I believe, an asteroid carrying a alien bacteria, wasn't it? Something like that?
Night of the Living Dead, the original, was an asteroid with radiation. They didn't really go into it. They didn't really discuss why. When we got into more of the remakes, especially remakes of Day of the Dead, they had more of almost a post-apocalyptic, like Revelations biblical explanation, the star shall be named Wormwood kind of thing. So it was never like deeply explored. Now, when we get into the Return of the Living Dead, which I want to go ahead and let everybody know that there is the original Night of the Living Dead. That's the granddaddy. That's the progenitor of zombieism, or the modern cinematic zombie, especially the Shambler. The two creators of Night of the Living Dead both took and started their own franchises. One was Romero doing the Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead series, and the other was the other director beginning the Return of the Living Dead series. And in the Return of the Living Dead series, that he actually changes where zombies come from. And in Return of the Living Dead, it's actually due to some weird government toxic waste stuff that actually causes things to be reanimated.
I believe that was the case. Funny enough, actually what I was thinking of when it came to the asteroid was a creepypasta I had read. The title was Self-Preservation, and basically what happens in that one is there's these people watching a meteor shower, and the main character who's speaking didn't get to go to watch it, and he's finding out that the people who were there, a rock landed on the earth and the people started to rot and kind of go into a kind of death rotting. I'm going to leave that in, but I'm not happy about the way I said it. Anyway, the people begin to rot and decay and stuff. And what they find works is if they eat living things, living flesh, starting with insects mainly, it halts it and actually kind of reverses it. So you can guess where this goes, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that going back to Return of the Living Dead, that Return of the Living Dead is actually where we first see zombies eating brains. That's the first zombie thing that ever mentions a zombie eating a brain. And they do mention why, because they actually get to talk to a zombie. Although the zombies in that series are mostly mindless, every once in a while one will talk. And when they ask a zombie why it eats brains, it says that basically the endorphins in the brains take away the pain of living as an undead monstrosity. So it's not for sustenance, it's as a painkiller. So I thought that's kind of an interesting twist that's way back in the zombie legendary, but that most people don't really understand where that came from.
So here's my question. Do you think they're scarier if they're completely brainless or if they talk once in a while?
I actually think they're scariest if they talk every once in a while. Not all the time. I don't want, smart zombies, because if you have smart zombies, then it's really not a zombie anymore. But if just every once in a while you get a behind the curtain look into what it's like to be a zombie, with the implication that there might be some person left in there, I actually think that's the scariest of the three options.
I actually agree with that. And as a matter of fact, we're going to bring up another creepypasta. This is going to happen a lot. You'll all just have to deal with it.
Yeah, you're going to hear us bring up creepypastas and that sort of thing a lot. We love web horror. That's why it was the very first episode.
Exactly. But the creepypasta, I can't remember the title, and I couldn't really find it, unfortunately, to reread. But the story is, it's this person talking about, their rehab, and they don't say from what right away, but they're talking about how, they're mostly blind and they can't walk straight and they can't think straight. Their whole brain is there, but their body doesn't really kind of sync up with it. And the whole story as it goes on is it gets explained that they were rehabilitated from being a zombie. And of course, everybody hates them, torches and pitchforks and everything, saying, my, family member, whatever, was killed by your kind. You shouldn't be alive. They should have executed you. And the more that they get kind of pressured and anxious, the more those instincts come out. And that's where it kind of ends. It ends with somebody pushing this former zombie too far. They attack and they're killed. And my one big complaint about this, we talked about this in the web horror episode, is that they narrate right up until the point where they explain, I felt a sharp object force itself into the back of my neck. It's like, how are you reporting that? But that's not important. What's important is that up until that, it was a really interesting story.
Absolutely. And I find the somewhat conscious zombies to be a lot scarier than you're dead and your body just walks around. Not that I don't like having both of those be present in stories, but as far as what is scarier, it's definitely the you might be in there zombie.
I like that idea too. Like, just the idea that if there's still a human in there, it's not only scary for the people around them, it's scary for the idea of what happens to you when you zombify or zombinate, as is the correct medical term.
I officially nominate that as a correct medical term. Zombinate, recapitate, and Draculean. These are words that we are now considering part of the liminal radio lexicon.
We're going to have to write a dictionary one day. But anyway, it's a really scary thought. And there's actually a story I wrote that I remember when I read this creepypasta, I joked around with myself a lot. Joked, y'all get your mind out of the gutter, folks, that they stole my idea. because the idea I had involved rehabilitating zombies and what the world would be like after that. But we can get to that a little later when we talk about our own individual works.
So circling back to the outline, as we often have to do, I want to talk about one last origin of zombies, which is magic. We do see that, of course, it's kind of in the original zombie, the voodoo zombie, which is where the word originally comes from. And so we do see it. I don't think we see it as much in mainstream movies. We don't see magic as much in mainstream zombie movies, but I do feel like we see it in things like Dungeons and Dragons. I still feel like we see it in video games. So the magically animated zombie definitely is a thing that exists. We see necromancers raising zombies. So it's a little bit less in the actual horror movies. We do see it in lots of video games. Dragon Age Veilguard actually has a whole thing around zombies being raised by necromancers. So there's a lot of magic fantasy zombies without so much being in the mainstream horror franchise.
Not to mention the Blight itself is a whole thing of zombieism and mutant zombies.
That's true. In the entire Dragon Age franchise, the Blight and the Darkspawn are just zombies.
That sounds about right. I haven't played much of Dragon Age, but I definitely played Veilguard, and I see that for sure.
To circle back to what we were talking about previously about being aware as a zombie, there's actually a really interesting short from the horror anthology series VHS. And one of them they call Zombie Cam, or at least that's what I call it. I don't remember if that's the name of the short or not, but it's where a guy is out with a GoPro riding on his bike and gets attacked by a zombie. He gets bitten, comes back as a zombie while wearing the GoPro, and we see him doing zombie stuff from the GoPro. It's really interesting to see zombie stuff happening from a zombie point of view. The really interesting part, though, is that he is apparently still in there enough because he gets a phone call from his wife, and it brings him back to himself enough to realize he is a danger, and he takes himself out with a shotgun rather than continue to be a danger and possibly kill his wife, who he is very much in love with. So I kind of like that as an element as we were talking about why the partially aware zombie can be so scary, but also so great for stories, is because it gives you that opportunity to show someone overcoming the zombieism by force of will and taking themselves out rather than hurt someone, which is always just such a cool trope.
I got to tell you, that's one place where it really definitely worked, because I did see that one. I'm going to tell you somewhere where it didn't work. It's not exactly a zombie, but have you seen the Resident Evil movies?
Yes.
Yeah, they're shit. But anyway, in the second one, Apocalypse, there's a scene where Alice, Paul's wife, is fighting Nemesis, and Nemesis was formerly, I guess, her brother, and it's staring at her, and it's like remembering her, and it joins her side. But here's the problem with that. Nemesis is a creature that no longer has the human brain. The parasite destroys and replaces the brain. So there is absolutely no way in a science fiction movie that he could possibly have remembered her, because the brain is entirely gone, and that's where the memories live. And it's bothered me to this day, and I hate Paul W.S. Anderson for what he's done to many Capcom properties. May he rot in hell.
So I feel that pretty much covers the zombie origins, where the different places we get zombies from. So I feel we are now going into the territory of, all right, how do we survive the zombie apocalypse? And I feel the best way we can address that is to look at different movies and see what lessons they can teach us. Different movies, different video games, different media, and see what they can tell us about how to survive the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I think media can teach us more than the real world. A while back, I remember seeing this video where they were talking about zombies, and because they'd been especially during the pandemic, people were asking about zombies a lot. Apparently, somebody in the CDC said something to the effect of, "We have never had a zombie outbreak that wasn't immediately contained," and immediately you saw his face go stone, terrified. He's like, "What did I just say?" And obviously, it was just a slip of the tongue, I'm pretty sure. But if that is true, that means they exist and they haven't told us.
It is worth noting that the CDC did put out a guide to how to survive a zombie apocalypse. That was a real thing that they put out. Now, of course, it was just meant to be like a fun way to give people everything they're supposed to do in a pandemic, but they did literally put out a zombie survival guide, the CDC official.
Yep, I saw that too, and
maybe they weren't kidding, just saying.
It's possible, but I still think that we could learn more from some of these movies than we could from anything that the CDC might tell us, especially considering they're trying to keep the important stuff under wraps. So we have a few important lessons and ideas that could be taken away from media here, and we have a few pieces of media that seem to exemplify each of these lessons. And the first lesson I have listed here is more of a question, something you need to ask yourself. is the world meant to go back to normal? Are you supposed to survive?
And there are definitely movies that exemplify this scenario where the world's not coming back and you're not going to make it. This isn't all of them by any means, but we definitely have to look at these kind of no-win scenarios where you're just not going to survive and you're not meant to. One of the classic ones, the kind of the first one that we have to talk about, because it was also one of the proto-zombie stories, which is the I Am Legend, Last Man on Earth, Omega Man type story, whichever one of those interpretations you want to use, the book, the movie, all the different movie adaptations, where the entire end point is supposed to be that these new creatures, these vampire zombie type things, they are the inheritors of the earth. They are the new species, and to them, the last human is the scary monster.
And we could apply that lesson to AI as well, if I may go on a short tangent.
A short tangent that may be a hint as to next week's episode.
Maybe. So, the idea of the inheritors of the earth, these creatures that were basically the next evolution of mankind, doesn't it always seem like AI is that way? Doesn't it always seem like there's these machines that are taking over, and it's always depicted in such a way as this is the enemy of mankind. This is our folly coming back to get us. But it's not, really. And do you know why?
Why is that?
What is the point of human reproduction? Is to create stronger, more survivable offspring, am I right?
That is the whole evolutionary idea principle.
So the idea of mankind creating machine intelligence and eventually machine creatures that are smarter, more survivable, and essentially inheriting the earth from mankind, that's just evolution, isn't it? That's just Darwin and reproduction.
Now, we can argue whether or not that's a goal we actually want to pursue, because while it might be good for the quote-unquote species as a whole, it might not be very good for the individual. And good of the individual versus good of the species is an entire philosophical debate that is for another episode, although will probably happen on some episode, and may even be touched on later in this episode. Stay tuned for that.
Well, my final thought on the subject before hint, hint, next week's episode is simply this. I don't think it's a matter of goals. I think it's a matter of inevitability. I think we are biologically drawn to create things that are stronger than us to carry on our legacy. So I think the AI overlords are inevitable. But again, you'll have to wait till next week's episode for more information on that.
And circling back, that fits perfectly into another movie with this same kind of message, which is The Girl with All the Gifts. These are a fungal zombie, which actually we're going to go ahead and jump in and realize that I forgot one of the newest and most interesting types of zombies, which are zombies that are created by fungus. This is an origin for zombies. It can create the mutagenic zombies, it can create the shamblers, it can create the infected, but it's just a new way, it's a new variation on the virus. But instead of being a virus, it's a fungus, but usually based in the cordyceps kind of family.
Cordyceps. I don't have much to say about them other than that they're terrifying.
Which, listeners, if you don't know what cordyceps is, just go on the internet, Google tarantula infected by cordyceps, never sleep again, and blame me.
Don't do it. It's a trap. It's a trap.
It is, but do it anyway. So, of course, he's talking about The Last of Us. Am I right?
Yeah, The Last of Us is the classic, the one that everyone's familiar with as the zombie with the fungal origin. But Girl with All the Gifts also does it and may have done it first. I'm not sure about the timelines.
Editor's note, The Last of Us actually did release first. It released in 2013, where The Girl with All the Gifts released in 2016. We'll figure it out later, and we're definitely going to talk about what you're all expecting us to talk about, Joel's decision, but we'll get to that a little later. You'll have to keep listening for that.
And the upshot of The Girl with All the Gifts, again, is the same idea that these new infected zombies are the next inheritors of the earth, and that although I kind of feel really weird about the ending of Girl with All the Gifts, because the whole point is, we should just hand it over to them. We should infect ourselves and embrace our new zombie overlords. And I feel like that's a very weird, I subjugate myself to Darwinism kind of vibe. Not my favorite ending to a movie, but it definitely brings up some interesting ideas.
See, to me, it seems like it is the most survivable and smartest thing to do. But being who I am, I still wouldn't do it. I don't want to.
And, of course, going back to the creepypasta self-preservation that you mentioned, that's another one where you become infected with that, and there really is no out. You're not going to make it. There's really no way to not get infected by this thing. So that's another one. So anyway, this entire group of stories, the takeaway is sometimes you're not going to survive. Sometimes you're not meant to survive. Sometimes survival's just not an option. But most of the time it is. Most of the time it's going to be worth it to struggle, worth it to try to make it. I belong to a lot of groups where people discuss various kind of preparedness, be it for the zombie apocalypse or be it for the hurricane that's going to happen next week. And in them, you tend to have different groups, the ones who are determined that they're going to try to survive anything the world throws at them. And then you have a different group, usually younger kind of Gen Z vibes, that their entire thing is, hey, if things get too tough, I'm out. I'm just going to take the way out. I'm not going to do this. I don't want to survive a really bad thing, which I find that to be a really unfortunate limiting mindset because unless I am in one of these complete no-win situations, I am going to go until something puts me down. I am going to keep striving. I'm going to keep striving because there is a saying that I was actually taught by one of my martial arts instructors, which is you should always build a mountain of corpses before you die because you may run out of enemies before you run out of luck.
I like that. I like that a lot.
But so moving right along to assuming we are going to survive and assuming we are going to try to survive, we have the movies which can actually help teach us how. And each one of these movies is going to have some really interesting lessons we can take away. And of course, we got to start at the beginning, the original Night of the Living Dead. I can think of some very specific things we can learn about surviving the zombie apocalypse from this movie.
One of the lessons I got from it is listen to the guy who can remain calm.
Absolutely. In a zombie apocalypse, or in reality, in any dangerous situation, being calm and being logical is a superpower. And the main character in Night of the Living Dead, that's his superpower. He is able to survive up to a certain point. We'll get to that in a minute. But he's able to do so well because he remains calm and remains logical through the entire thing, doesn't lose his head, doesn't panic like the people around him.
So I remember reading about a lot of controversy, too, in the real world about the actor who played this guy. At the time, there was this controversy because they had a black leading actor and a black leading character, and that just wasn't done at the time, so to speak, which, obviously is really ignorant and really dumb. So, the guy was kind of a big deal. The actor and everything was kind of a big deal.
And the interesting thing about that is that, in a way, the reason that character is black is more interesting and more important than if they had done it on purpose. Because that character was originally not written to be black. That was just the main character. And then whenever they had auditions, the guy who was the most amazing actor, who was the best for the part, just happened to be black. So that character is black not because they needed a black actor, but just because a black actor happened to be the best actor. Now, of course, there's a lot of discussion about how much his race plays into the movie and how much it influenced it. Romero always insisted for the longest time that it didn't influence it at all. But later in life, he kind of said, okay, maybe it did subconsciously, but in some ways I feel like that was him just kind of caving to pressure because everyone was so convinced that this person's race had to be the most important thing about them, when in reality, it's that this guy was an amazing actor. It's that the guy played this calm, cultured role, because the actor actually changed the role a little bit, because originally this was going to be more of a blue-collar truck driver kind of guy, and he became a lot more articulate, a lot more calm, collected, and a lot more of an interesting guy just because that was kind of the energy that the actor brought to the role.
And there's a lesson there in that as well. The lesson is racism will get you killed. You can't be dividing. We're humans. They're zombies. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what you believe religiously. It's us against them. And we all got to get along.
But as we mentioned, the fact that his calmness did help him survive for a long time, he ultimately did not survive. He dies at the end. One of the things we can learn from that is never trust the authorities, because it is actually the official sheriff and his deputies, this line of men with guns going around shooting zombies, where our main character comes stumbling out. He's kind of disheveled. He isn't talking very well because he's very traumatized and injured. So he comes stumbling out. They think he's a zombie and shoots him. So we know right there that these authority figures, these people from the government who are quote unquote here to help, are actually the biggest danger to him and do end up killing our main character. So we see this over and over again in zombie media. Don't trust the authorities. In 28 Days Later, whenever our main characters go looking for help with these ex-military guys, they think this is going to be this wonderful thing. Oh my God, we found the military. They're going to help us. And then they end up doing really horrible stuff, trying to keep them as slaves. Because, again, the authorities do not necessarily have your best interests in mind.
Wait, are we talking about fiction or real life right now?
Totally fiction. The idea that the authorities might not have your best interest in mind is totally not in any way relating to the real world. That would never happen in the real world.
The very idea. At the end of the day, it's not just the traditional authorities, though. It's not, in all seriousness, just your cops, just your whatever else have you. It's anybody who decides they want to fill a power vacuum. Anybody who decides that they are the leader. Don't trust them. Keep your settlement communist.
Or in a narco-tribal gift-based economy, whatever suits you and your people the best.
Yeah, yours has more syllables, so it's probably smarter.
And you bring up a good point that it's any authority figure. We see that a lot in The Walking Dead, where we see the governor, where we see all these different things. We see Negan. All these leaders of these compounds end up being these scary-ass characters because generally the people who want to be leaders are doing so for these less than benevolent reasons.
Can I tell you what I hated about the Negan arc?
What did you hate about the Negan arc?
Rick turned into a big, giant wuss. And let me tell you the scene where I got that. There's a scene where they're both away from everybody, away from their people, and Negan pulls this power move. He hands him his weapon. He turns his back on him, and he's like, "You're not going to do it. You're not going to." He doesn't say that. That's what he's thinking. And I'm like, if Rick killed Negan and his people saw that he was dead, their thing would have fallen apart right there. But Rick's too afraid to risk it. Rick, you used to be so cool, man. I don't know what happened to you. Now you're impaled on some rebar somewhere. And there's your lesson, folks. If you listen to people who are cult leaders, you end up impaled on rebar.
And actually, characters lacking the guts to do what is very obviously the only correct action is my complaint in a lot of media, not just zombie and horror. I actually really like the Dresden novels, which, if anyone's unfamiliar, they're basically a magical detective urban fantasy kind of thing. But I can't stand the main character because so many times this guy who is supposed to be this badass wizard who has been hardened in all these different wars will be given in a situation where he needs to kill some objectively bad guy and then will whine and cry about it for a long time. I'm like, this is not the first combat situation you've been in. Why is this so hard for you? I get that these sort of things should not be taken lightly and we should depict that. But at the same time, this guy has supposedly been here, done that. And it just doesn't seem like the sort of thing that should be causing him that much trouble. So I definitely get your struggle with the character of Rick.
Batman too.
And Batman's ideas and how that's handled in the comics is definitely something that's going to get at least somewhat touched on when we do comics and horror.
Absolutely. All I'm going to say is this when it comes to Batman, very quick tangent, don't worry. I love everything about the Batman stories as a whole. Batman as a character, I have some issues with, but he probably wouldn't survive in a zombie apocalypse. But anyway, circling back, what were you saying, Gray?
Well, to circle back, I want to mention another lesson that, again, we can learn from the death of the main character of Night of the Living Dead, which is gun safety. Oh my God, I cannot tell you how often I get so frustrated because people act like gun safety is no longer important just because the dead have started walking. If anything, it's more important. We have our main character. Now, this wasn't exactly his fault. He didn't necessarily know. We had a line of men with guns all firing. That creates a distinct down range. As anyone who has ever done firearm safety will tell you, you do not ever stand down range of firearms. So he approached this group and, of course, got shot. So keep in mind all your gun safety rules. He violated a gun safety rule. Again, not entirely of his own volition, but he did violate it, and that's one of the reasons he got shot. So remember, the all guns are loaded. Very important rule. Do not point your gun at anything you do not intend to destroy. Very important rule.
And I'm going to tell you this. We're both gun people, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm somebody who has always believed in gun safety almost to a fault, but I don't know if that's even possible. But I'm somebody who believes in gun safety. I'm someone who believes not everyone should be allowed to have a gun. I'm also a gun nut, which is, I know, kind of in our modern world, that's kind of a oxymoron to a lot of people. But I will tell you, all the lessons I've learned about gun safety, I will carry with me into the zombie apocalypse, and I probably won't accidentally shoot myself.
And if you want to talk about probably one of the most tragic scenes in a zombie movie pertaining to that was actually from a very silly zombie movie from Planet Terror, which was a movie that was double featured in the Grindhouse thing, which if you've never seen Grindhouse, it's a fantastic double feature, but we're not going to get too much into that. But in Planet Terror, which is overall a fairly silly zombie flick, it involves a woman spinning around on her head, shooting people with her machine gun leg. So that gives you a little bit of a vibe of what kind of zombie movie this is. But there is a scene where a woman has this probably 9-year-old boy and leaves him in a car while there are zombies around. She has to in order to do what she has to do. That's not the part I'm talking about. The thing is, she takes a pistol hands it to him, and tells him that basically if he sees a zombie, he should shoot it. Now, the thing the kid does immediately is start to point the gun at himself. She tells him, no, don't do that. Don't point at yourself. Just point it at the zombies. So this is a kid that obviously is not old enough, is not mature enough, does not have any gun safety. She walks off, goes and deals with the plot and the story and the zombies and all that. Whenever she comes back to this car to retrieve her kid, he is dead and has shot himself in the head through exactly the type of lack of gun safety that you were expecting when you saw that scene. I was not expecting that. That was definitely a punch out of nowhere. I thought that was a pretty wild thing to leave in, but that just goes to show that if you have this idea that in the zombie apocalypse, oh, we're just going to hand everybody a gun. Oh, we're not worried about training. We're not worried about teaching people. We don't necessarily need to worry about gun safety because there are zombies. It just goes to show that gun doesn't know that it is the zombie apocalypse, and you need just as much gun safety, if not more.
I don't know. That's a good way to make sure there's enough food to go around.
I do not think we are here for a modest proposal at this time.
No, we're not. But yeah, gun safety it's important in the real world. It's important in the zombie world. Guns, it's a point and click kill. It's a point and click kill. They're inherently dangerous. That's probably why a lot of people love them. But, you got to respect it, whether you're in the zombie apocalypse or not. And another thing I'm going to add is there are the type of people we mentioned earlier who maybe don't want to survive. And there are people who might have, how can we put this? Might make rash decisions when things get really rough. Maybe don't give them guns.
Well, and that's very much of a thing in the zombie apocalypse. There's going to be this entire thing of who do you have around you? Can they be trusted with a gun? If they can't be trusted with a gun, can you trust them to be around you? It's this entire complex thing on how you're going to create the team you're going to survive with and the community you're going to be part of. And it's got a lot of moving parts and kind of depends from situation to situation on how you're going to handle that. But it's very much of a thing of these guns are very dangerous machines. Now, I do want to segue to they are not the only dangerous machines. So remember, even though gun safety is very important, safety in general is very important. Safety when it comes to cars, safety when it comes to power tools. Which leads me into, I want to talk about the Dawn of the Dead remake, where one of the specific things that happens is they, in order to get past the zombies, take this bus and they armor it and they give it all these weapons. And one of the things they do is get these chainsaws and they create slats in the bus so that they can run the chainsaws up and down, killing any zombies that might actually try to grab the bus. And as they're plowing through the zombies with the bus, what of course happens, the bus rolls, the chainsaws go everywhere, and a bunch of people die by chainsaw because they were doing something crazy dangerous on their own, independent of the zombies. And even without the zombies being the direct cause of the death, the lack of safety kills them via chainsaw.
And can I just say, don't use chainsaws at all. Chainsaws are a stupid idea in the zombie apocalypse for the following reasons. A, it can be reversed on you. B, you can trip and kill one of your allies. And 3, it can run out of gas and then it's entirely useless. Like if a gun runs out of bullets, you can use that buttstock to whack people, to whack zombies, I should say. It can still be a weapon. A chainsaw is going to be entirely useless.
Although I would say that if you were to take the bar and chain off of a chainsaw, weld that onto a handle, you might actually have a pretty interesting weapon. But that's actually going to be discussed a little bit later when we start talking about what will be the best weapons in a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, and you are right. That would be a good weapon. But like, my point is, if you're in the middle of a crowd of zombies and your chainsaw runs out of gas, you're not going to be able to weld it onto a stick. A chainsaw is just a bad idea. And that is where my feet are going to be firmly planted. I am going to take a long nap on that hill. I probably won't die on it because that's kind of silly, but you see what I'm saying.
Absolutely. It's like any type of plan that involves you to tell your attacker, hang on, wait a minute, let me weld this piece of machinery together, I'll be right back. It's like a joke. This is sort of connected, but only semi-connected. I actually am a martial artist, and I practice Taekwondo. And one criticism that someone once made that I had to be like, okay, yeah, you have a little bit of a point, is when someone asked them if they thought Taekwondo was a good martial art for self-defense, they said, nope, because you don't have time to stretch first. And while that's not 100% accurate, I will own that there is at least an element of truth for that.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm trained in Hungar, and I am previously was in boxing. I didn't do it for too terribly long, but I learned quite a bit from that. And the simpler the martial art, likely the more effective it is in the real world.
Well, and I will say one thing for specifically against zombies. that Taekwondo, if you use the right elements of Taekwondo, could be incredibly effective against zombies, because a sidekick is very useful at moving people. And if you sidekick a zombie, you are almost definitely going to push it back or even knock it over. And remember, knocking a zombie over is almost as good as killing them, because it takes them a while to get up and then you can get away.
You also got the bottom of your boot in that situation.
So once they're down, you can then use that to take them completely out.
But on that note of safety, you have to worry about other people and what they're going to do and if they're going to take safety seriously. And we really have to occasionally make a very difficult decision. It might be leaving someone out of your party. It might be taking someone out of your party, if you know what I mean. And that's another major downfall people have in zombie films and in zombie books, is they can't make the hard decisions. They can't think, hey, this guy's going to turn into a zombie and kill us all. I got to shoot him. They can't think, if we take any more people into our party, we're going to all starve to death. And they end up taking more people into their party because they can't make the difficult decision to leave them behind. What do you think on this?
That actually leads into my favorite thing about zombie movies, about zombie stories in general, is that they really are about hard moral decisions. We didn't really mention it earlier in the podcast, so I do want to get to it now, where one of the key things about zombie stories is zombie stories aren't about zombies. The zombies are just there to facilitate the story, and at least if it's a well-done zombie story. And what zombie stories are actually about is, what do people do in crises? How do people handle dangerous, scary, hard situations? And one of the most interesting things to do is watch people answer really hard moral decisions. Like Hatter was talking about, what do you do if one of your people is infected? Do you mercy kill them? Do you keep them around as long as you can? Is there some way to help them? What do you do if you are faced with people who need help, but you don't have the resources to help them? How do you answer these questions? And how the characters answer these questions is usually what is really interesting about zombie movies and about zombie stories in general.
Yeah, a good example. You remember the scene in 28 Days Later, the two people help the main character. Long story short, they're in a house at night and one of the infected gets in and bites her friend. She immediately hacks him up with a machete. That's how you got to be if you want to survive. As much as painful as it is, as hard as it sounds, that's how you got to be.
Well, and I feel like in a zombie survival situation, and you could probably say in life in general, but we're going to stick to zombie survival situations, I feel like there are two kinds of hard calls you have to make, two kinds of really hard decisions. One is where it is super clear what you have to do. There is just no question. You know the right thing to do. You just have to have the guts to do it. And I feel like a lot of people struggle with that one, even though it's very clear that I know what I have to do, but I don't have the strength to do it meme, which is often done as a joke, but is also a very real thing. But then there's a second option, which is it is not clear what the right thing to do is, where it's not just, oh, I need to have the guts to do the right thing. You have to really do some soul searching to even figure out what the right thing is. Those were all some good examples of it's very clear what the right thing is, such as killing the infected person because they're going to die no matter what you do. This is the best thing for everyone. But there are ones where the right answer isn't as clear, which brings me to a discussion I've been waiting this whole podcast to have, which is the concept of what Joel did in Last of Us at the end and whether or not he did the right thing. Do you want to give us a little bit of a rundown of kind of how Last of Us ends and what Joel did?
Right. So obviously there's some spoilers ahead here, but the game came out in like 2011. If you haven't played it yet, that's on you. Editor's note, that's 2013. What happens in the end is basically throughout the game, Joel is trying to deliver this girl, Ellie, to these people, the Fireflies, and she is immune to the fungal infection. So long story short, he gets her there, and it's revealed that basically to get at her brain, well, you know, to get at anybody's brain, they're going to have to kill her. Now, Joel lost his daughter in the beginning of the game, and he's grown attached to Ellie, and, well, how can we put this? He Friday the 13th everybody in that building to save her. Like, and I say Friday the 13th not as a machete, but as in there was a big bloody mess by the time he was done.
Absolutely. And ultimately, the decision he has to make is if Ellie is killed, it could help save the entire world. It could create a vaccine that would prevent people from ever turning into zombies again. Heck, it might have saved some zombies. We don't even know what all the details would have been. But it would have been a cure to the zombie plague, but she would have had to die. Now, a very important factor is she's unconscious this whole time. She's also an underage girl. So whether she would have been conscious to make the decision and whether or not we can really factor in her consent because she's underage, those are two kind of separate factors, but that doesn't come up. That's not part of this decision because she is unconscious. She is underage. Her consent is not taken into. She's not able to consent. These are decisions that other people are going to make for her one way or the other. The Fireflies are about to kill her in order to harvest her brain matter and make the vaccine. And Joel either has to let them and save the world or stop them, which requires him killing everyone in the building. He goes for option B, goes on an absolute murder spree, kills them all, and then, at least for the run of this game, never tells her. So he chooses this one person he cares about over the fate of the entire world. And I feel that it's such an interesting part of The Last of Us for us all to debate and kind of ask, did Joel do the right thing? So, Hatter, I want to start by asking you, do you think Joel did the right thing?
Well, let's take all of the what ifs out of this. Let's say that these Firefly people actually definitely could have created this vaccine using Ellie, right? Let's say that we know for a fact that they can create this vaccine. I'm going to say Joel, speaking in terms of sheer numbers, taking emotion out of the equation, absolutely did the wrong thing. But I can't honestly say that I would not have done the same thing he did, because we're human.
Well, and that's such an interesting point of view, because you mentioned numbers. Now, whenever we're talking about morality and numbers, we of course have to talk about the trolley problem. For anyone who's not familiar with the trolley problem, that's the idea that you have a trolley that is going down one track. Down this track, there are 3 people tied to the track, and of course for the trolley problem, you can't change any of this, you can't untie people, you only get to make one decision. Everyone always wants to try to cheat the trolley problem, which defeats the whole purpose of the trolley problem. Don't cheat it, just accept the conceit. So the trolley is heading down the track. If you do nothing, it's going to kill 3 people. If, however, you take an active action and flip the switch, it will move to another track where there is only 1 person. And that's the moral question. Do you take an action that will kill only 1 person, or do you take no action, resulting in 3 people dying? This always sparks really interesting questions. Does it matter who those 3 people are? Does it matter who the 1 person is? Is it relevant that you have to take an action versus inaction? Which part of this infers moral liability to you? And are 3 lives inherently more valuable than 1 life? And if you're comfortable flipping the switch, then there's a way to rephrase the question called the surgeon's dilemma, which is technically the same thing, where you have 1 patient who is definitely going to live and 3 patients who are definitely going to die. But you can kill patient A and give his organs to the other 3 people, and they will definitely live. Is that morally okay? And if it's different than the trolley problem, why? And most people will have one answer for the trolley problem and a different for the surgeon's dilemma. But the only reason is because flipping a switch feels a lot less icky than stabbing a guy and cutting out his organs. So it's very much an emotional difference for most of those people who would have a difference of opinion in those two. So we have to ask ourselves, when we're doing moral calculus, is it strictly a numbers game, or does it matter what we do, what we don't do, what our actions are? And this isn't a difference between utilitarianism and deontology, which, to the super quick version of that, is a utilitarianist says, hey, I want to do the most good for the most people. A deontologist says, I want to do the right thing no matter what. And those are 2 different ways of looking at the world. A utilitarianist says, okay, let's kill Ellie. It's numbers. We got to save the most number of people. A deontologist says, hey, it's wrong to kill a little girl, period. I don't care how many people it saves. I'm not killing a little girl. So even if we take Joel's attachment to her out of it, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, he was definitely attached to her. That's why he made the decision. He made the decision for emotional reasons. Even if we approach it as a moral question, if we are more of a deontologist, we say, hey, it's wrong to kill an innocent person no matter how many people we're saving. And that's more the track I'm going to take. I'm more of a deontologist. I am not willing to do a morally wrong thing kind of for any reason, because if you'll do a bad thing for any reason, then you'll do a bad thing for any reason. So I'm more of a deontologist. I'm going to say Joel did the right thing.
I'm going to say it like this. I think that the problem is when people have these discussions, yeah, we do miss out on a lot of nuance. Like the whole thing with the trolley problem is people will ask, what kind of people are these 3 people? Because if they're like, let's say 3 escaped murderers, it's different. But oftentimes we have to go based on the information that we have. We don't know who these people are. We don't know who the people in the surgeon's chair are. Those 3 people you save with those organs, they might be people who are going to go out and die anyway. The difference I see in the trolley problem versus the surgical problem is just that. These people who are coming in who were absolutely going to die are dying for natural reasons. So I feel the same way in that if we take the organs from the guy who's definitely going to live, we're killing to halt a natural process. it doesn't say why the people were dying, but obviously something was going on with their bodies that was causing their lives to end. Am I right?
Okay, but let's take out a variable then. Let's say these 3 people were injured in a trolley accident. So let's keep it all equal across the board. There was a trolley accident that injured these 3 people, damaging their organs in such a way that this guy can save them by donating his organs. He has to die first. So either way, we're not talking about the natural course of human life. We're talking about death by trolley in both cases. Does that affect your decision?
So the surgical thing is the sequel to the trolley thing now. We've invented this new canon.
I like it. The trolley problem cinematic universe. We need to make a movie about this.
Yes, we do. But I'm going to say there's really, and maybe this is just to make me feel better. I'm going to say with Joel, with the trolley, with the surgery, that there's no right answer. There is the decision that the person who is there, who's doing it, has to make. They don't have all the variables. They don't have all the ideas. They don't know who these people are. They need to make a decision. There's no win here. So I would say either decision they make is both right and wrong. And if it's me, I'm probably not going to take an innocent person's organs to save somebody else. I'm probably going to sit there thinking about the trolley. You've seen A Good Place, right?
Yes.
And you know the scene where they actually demonstrate the trolley problem in person to Chidi?
Yep.
The way he reacted is probably how I would react. So I should never be in this situation because I'd be sitting there trying to figure out exactly what the situation is and what the best thing to do is. And, everyone would get hit anyway. But with the Ellie thing, I can honestly probably fairly confidently say, despite the fact that in my mind, I do think, because there's a difference between 3 people and 1 person on a trolley or on a surgical table and the literal entire human race in the world versus 1 kid. We cannot in any way say that is not that is the same thing. But either way, I'm telling you, if it was somebody I really cared about, I would do exactly what Joel did. In my mind, it would be wrong. I would continue to believe it was wrong after, but hell, I made this decision. That's the decision I made. Oh, well, you know what I mean?
Well, and I have 2 kind of things to say to wrap up on this. One, I find really interesting is that what a rabbi would tell you if you were to ask him. I am not myself Jewish, but I follow a lot of rabbis on social media for weird reasons. And rabbinical law is really interesting because any question that you can ever imagine asking, they have over thousands of years argued and come up with answers to. So there is an official Jewish rabbinical answer to the trolley problem, which is they cannot, under any circumstances, take an innocent life in order to save someone. It is strictly forbidden. So if a Jewish person were to ask his local rabbi, which is always the advice you're given, please consult your local rabbi, he would tell him that, look, you cannot under any circumstances pull that lever. Every life is infinitely valuable. The infinite value of that one life is equal to the infinite value times 3, because infinite is infinite, doesn't matter how many. So you under no circumstances can. So a rabbi would tell you not to pull the lever. The one thing I will add kind of at the end here is a scene from Huck Finn by Mark Twain, where they talk about what is a good thing to do, what is a bad thing to do, and which one you should do. Now, of course, it's meant to be very satirical because what the character is talking about doing is returning someone's slave, which is something we objectively would see as a bad thing to do. But he is being told by his world, by the people around him, that the right thing to do would be to return this enslaved person to their owner. But he is friends with this enslaved person whose name is Jim. And he's thinking, I'm Jim's friend, but I'm told that keeping him and helping him escape is wrong. But Huck Finn ultimately thinks, I'm going to feel horrible if I help Jim. And I'm going to feel horrible if I don't help him. I've been told that helping him is wrong, but I want to help him. He's my friend. And I might as well do evil as good if the wages is the same. The idea that, look, I'm going to feel horrible if I do good. I'm going to feel horrible if I do evil. So ultimately, I'm going to do what I want to do. So I kind of feel like that's my takeaway too here, and a little bit of kind of what you were talking about, which is at the end of the day, do what feels right to you, do what you want to do, because we could argue about the morals all day, but ultimately it's what you do and what you can live with.
And of course, we cannot say the full name of this character on this podcast.
Yes, we'll just say that the full name of this character is one of the reasons people keep banning Huck Finn in public schools. And all I will say to that is, please go out and read banned books. It is your moral duty to read books that have been banned.
Yeah, we don't want to end up in a Fahrenheit 451 situation here. Anyway, Huck Finn aside, Joel aside, trolleys and surgeries aside, you're going to have to make the tough decisions. And I guess what we just came to after that long kind of discussion is you're just going to have to do what feels right, because sometimes the right decision is not going to be obvious. But when the right decision is obvious, you got to make it. No action, not making a choice is a choice, folks.
So, moving right along to some other strategies that will help you survive the zombie apocalypse. One is a lesson that we learn from several different things, including the Dawn of the Dead original and Dawn of the Dead remake, which is the question comes up, where are you going to try to survive the zombie apocalypse? Of course, in that movie, they try to survive it in a mall. Now, this works out kind of well for them, but they even do point out the fact that a mall has a lot of problems. It's not very defensible. It has a lot of entrances, and that actually ends up being their downfall eventually. So one of the questions we have is, where do you try to survive a zombie apocalypse? What are some of your thoughts on this, Hatter?
Well, one of my first thoughts I want to mention here, and we'll get into this in a moment, but you got to remember the following phrase. If you thought of it, so did everybody else. If it seems like the obvious choice, that's what's going to happen. So go with your third choice or your fourth choice. Now, for me, I'm going to be right at my house. My house only has one entrance. It has an upstairs, and the door is nearly impossible for even me to open. But, if I'm stuck in my room, I'm kind of screwed anyway. But my point is, not a lot of people live out here, and a lot of people think it's a bad idea to stay at home. I have supplies, pre-prepare, that's what I'm saying. But you don't want to go to the obvious places. You want to go to a drugstore, everybody's going to be there trying to get the drugs. You want to go to a grocery store, everybody's going to be there trying to get the groceries. You need to find a fourth or fifth choice place and make that work. You need to be able to improvise.
Absolutely. I feel like one of the key things is rural is better than urban. If you find yourself in an urban setting, you need to get out of the urban setting, preferably before the zombie apocalypse, because urban settings aren't that great, although that may just be my country boy biases. But you bring up such a great point that if you've thought of it, so did everyone else, because there are these great resources like gun shops and hardware stores and grocery stores and drugstores. The problem with it is everyone else is going for those too. There is actually a movie that isn't a zombie movie, but we can learn something from here, called The Hunger Games. If you're not familiar with Hunger Games, it's one of my favorite books of all time because it does such a great thing of the strategy of the battle royale and all that, but we won't really go into that. Suffice it to say, a bunch of people are forced to fight to the death. They're dropped into this arena. And one of the key strategies that each character has to come up with how they're going to handle is in the middle where they're very first dropped is the cornucopia, which is basically just this big building with a whole bunch of resources. It's where the weapons are. It's where the food is, the medicine, everything they may need to survive and to be victorious, which means killing all the other people, is there in the cornucopia. The problem is everyone's going for the cornucopia at the same time, and it's going to be a bloodbath. So you have to decide, do I fight my way to the cornucopia, or do I wait and pull back, let them have all those supplies, and then I deal with my own issues my own way. I go out, I forage, I use my own skills to make weapons, instead of trying to go to the cornucopia, where it's going to be incredibly dangerous. And the most successful characters we see don't actually fight in the cornucopia. And I feel like we can take that lesson that, hey, don't go to where everyone else is. Make sure you have your own methods of surviving out on your own. I would actually argue probably the safest place you could be is going to be at a homestead, at a farmstead, out in the country that's already prepared. So the more rural you are, the more prepared you are, the more away from everyone else you are, the more cabin in the woods you are, probably the better you're going to be.
Yeah, which brings us back to an earlier lesson that I'll just kind of gloss over for a second here. Hell is other people.
Absolutely. The less you have to deal with other people, the safer you're going to be in the zombie apocalypse. Now, that still means you're going to need a community, because one person has a very hard time doing all the work that needs to be done to survive by themselves. But you definitely want to be only surrounded by the people you want to be surrounded by. The rank and file are not your friends.
Absolutely not. Definitely not. So, I'll ask you, what are some places you would go to, given the situation?
I'm actually going to say that, given the situation, I am going to be going, again, I have my own property where I am very rural. I actually have family that is literally adjacent to my property. Between the two of us, we have quite a bit of land. It's one of those, if the zombie apocalypse were to happen, yes, we would have to deal with some of the zombies, but we wouldn't have to deal with the great golden hordes of people fleeing cities because we're far enough away from that. Now, I will say one of the downsides is we are on a main access road, which actually brings us to another lesson that we learned from Dawn of the Dead, which Dawn of the Dead was the very first movie to ever show post-apocalyptic raiders. Because one of the things that happens in Dawn of the Dead is their mall is attacked by a biker gang. which a very fun aspect of that biker gang is the leader of the biker gang is actually Tom Savini, who is the makeup artist for the zombie movie and is kind of the father of zombie makeup. So that's an interesting little unrelated factoid. But one of the downsides to where I currently live is we are on a main road, so it wouldn't be that hard for people with bad intentions to find us, so that would be something to deal with. I would just say generally, I'm going to be trying to move as far away, as far into the wilderness, make myself as hard to find because stealth is your greatest weapon. That's kind of more, I'm going for more of a rural bushcraft survival kind of strategy, and I think that's going to be most successful for me. What's sort of your thoughts?
Well, I'm in actually pretty much exactly the same situation. I'm in a rural area. We're by a main access road. I hate to say this. I'm going to seem pretty evil. I'm counting on people coming through. I'm prepared for that for many reasons we won't get into here, but let's just say I've won competition shooting in the past.
It's a little bit of the vibe of enemies are so wonderful, they bring you new ammo.
That's exactly my thought. Not only ammo, but food, fresh clothing. Now, my goal is not going to be to kill people if I don't have to, but, you know, I wouldn't call myself a raider because I would stay at my home base, but I guess highwayman would be the term, right?
Well, again, highwayman implies that you would be attacking others. We're just going to say well-defended settlement.
And that's really what it is, because my goal is not to kill or even hurt people. I will rob them on occasion, and who knows, maybe I'll hire a few of them. Hire being in quotations, as in, you know, hey, I got a pretty good settlement here. You got some skills. You want to settle down? Hey, there you go.
If you rob a robber, have you committed robbery?
I'll bring you to the philosophical question that Batman asks. He says, if you kill a killer, there's the same amount of killers in the world. But if you kill 3 killers, there's like 2 less.
Which is so funny, I will touch on my disagreement with Batman. I think there's a difference between a killer and a murderer. That I do not think that a killer is necessarily a bad thing. I think a murderer is. If you kill a murderer, there's 1 less murderer in the world.
That's true. And we come back to numbers. If this is somebody, if we're talking Batman again, and the Joker who has killed literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and like there's a scene in The Dark Knight Returns where he says, when I think about all the people that I've killed by letting you live, and of course the Joker says, I never kept count. Batman says, I did. And he says, I know, and I love you for it. And that's really got no bearing on this. I just love that line. But yeah, numbers can be useful. And if Batman had killed the Joker, you know, it's kind of like the idea of if you were to go back in time and decide, you know, should I kill Hitler? Yeah, you'd be killing somebody, but you'd be saving 11 million lives.
Well, and again, I will say that to my personal philosophy, there is a big difference between killing someone who needs to be killed, who is a bad person, who is a threat, killing in self-defense, that sort of thing, and committing a murder, which is an unjustified killing. I would say most people would agree. Of course, Batman is his own unique case. Most people would agree if a person has a gun pointed at you, it is the morally correct action to kill them. Most people are on board with that. Now, the reason Batman isn't is for a very interesting reason. We will go ahead and diverge slightly into comic books, and then we'll circle back. But I do want to add this about Batman while we're on the topic, which is I don't think Batman refrains from killing because he thinks it's morally wrong, whatever he may tell us to make himself feel better. I think Batman doesn't kill for the same reason a recovering alcoholic doesn't drink. A recovering alcoholic can't drink, not because it's morally wrong to drink. I could have a drink, you could have a drink, won't hurt us at all, nothing wrong with it. But a recovering alcoholic, if they start drinking, they can't stop. So they can't drink at all. Same thing with Batman. You or I might be perfectly okay killing the Joker. Wouldn't be a problem at all. It would be the morally right thing to do. Batman, if he ever kills one bad guy, he's now got the justification, and he's just going to start whacking muggers left and right. He knows he's an angry person who can't trust himself, so he doesn't kill for the same reason an alcoholic doesn't drink. That's my theory, anyway.
That's actually addressed by the Batman Who Laughs. And in Under the Red Hood, Batman, when Jason Todd tells him, you know, you let the Joker live after he killed me, and is it because it would just be too hard to cross that line? He says, no, it would just be too easy. And I just end up, yeah. Quick note, for anybody who's wondering why this cut seems so abrupt, I cut a section of what we were talking about because it was a little uncomfortable, and I just didn't feel it was worth keeping in, simply because it didn't add enough to warrant that uncomfortability. And we won't typically cut content because it's uncomfortable, but that and the fact that it just didn't add much, I felt it warranted cutting it.
There's a lot of things you can do, such as making sure you're not addicted to nicotine, making sure that you're physically fit. That a lot of things that you can do that are going to help you with the zombie apocalypse that are just really good things to do anyway. Most things that will help you be more prepared for zombies are just good to do.
Absolutely. I'll quit in 2025. Anyway, what were we saying before we went into that tangent?
I think we were moving on and circling back to our outline, where we're going to talk about a really weird and interesting trope that we see a lot in all sorts of zombie media, which is the idea of domesticating or rehabilitating zombies. You already touched on the rehabilitating a little bit, but that we often see zombies being kind of treated like pets. And I'm going to say my takeaway here is that's a bad idea and you shouldn't do it. We can talk about the specific movies where we see it, but it always turns out horribly.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, I wrote a little story that involved this concept, if you want me to talk a bit about it.
Absolutely, go off.
So the story that I wrote was actually based on a dream I had, and it was almost word for word. I rarely have dreams that clear, so it made me happy that, I was able to do that. But the story I entitled Thunderheads, and it goes a little something like this, and it was me in the story, so I'm just going to speak from, No, I'm not going to speak from the third person. The main character in the story and his roommate were living in a post-zombie world, right? At this point, people have been immunized. We're starting to rebuild the infrastructure, but it's not all there yet. We still have kind of co-ops where people go to get their food and their supplies and, their basic needs, and you get like a certain amount of credits, and it was, if I recall correctly, it was based kind of on what your needs were. Like we mentioned earlier, if you were a smoker, you got a certain amount of cigarettes. Again, people don't start if you don't, quit if you do. Anyway, the two main characters were talking about how they didn't have any supplies left and they've been putting off going to the co-op to get their stuff. And the one character, this was me in the dream, looks outside and says, "Oh shit, there's a thunderstorm coming." And here's the problem with thunderstorms. In this post-zombie world, zombies had been rehabilitated and to the point where if they were still fresh enough, if you will, they could just be human again. But whatever was in their brain that made them go feral is still there. Now, there's also zombies that hide kind of under bridges and I'm trying to think of the right word for this. Like in dark places, they hide. Most of the time they're inactive because the vaccine also kind of repels them. It kind of creates a pheromone or whatever that makes people not smell delicious, I guess would be the right word. So, but when thunderstorms kick in, they go feral and they just attack everything. And the same thing happens to the rehabilitated human zombies. If they get too much of an anxiety or adrenaline spike, they'll go crazy and start attacking. So they called these zombies, both the rehabilitated ones and they called the rehabilitated ones Thunderheads. That's where the title comes from. I'm not sure why. I just thought it was a cool word. And they call the other ones Roaches, which was actually taken in an episode of Black Mirror, and I felt like my idea was stolen. But anyway, they called them Roaches. And the thunderstorm's starting up, and these two characters are on their way down to the co-op. And now the buildings people live in, they're barricaded. They're basically prepared for anything. They've been dealing with this for 20, 30 years at this point, and they know what to do. And they know not to get stuck out in a thunderstorm. But these two characters, for some reason, were dumb enough to go out because they thought the thunderstorm was further away, maybe. And as these two characters are walking back from the co-op with their supplies, you hear thunder and you hear, and that's where the dream ended, and that's where the story ends.
And that's awesome. I love the idea that things like a thunderstorm being used to amplify the fear of a zombie story. I actually think that's a great way of putting two cool things together.
Maybe I should rewrite it.
Absolutely. I'd love it. So, but we see that domestication and rehabilitation all sorts of places. We see in The Walking Dead where Michonne has her kind of de-weaponized zombies. We also see stories that are more dedicated to be about that. Do you remember the movie Fido where we have the domesticated zombies?
We talked a little bit about it while we were writing the outline, and I didn't remember it, but shortly after, yeah, I do remember that, actually. Oh, it came back to me after we finished writing.
For anyone who's not familiar with the movie, it's actually a little bit of like a retro kind of Fallout vibe type show, where there's post-apocalyptic to the zombie apocalypse, where people now use zombies as slaves and pets, and it's about this one kid and his pet zombie, and there's a whole thing that goes on. But ultimately, it's just about how they put these control collars on zombies, and then how that inevitably goes horribly wrong.
Did you say control collar?
Yes.
Kakarot! Sorry, had to. Go ahead.
Another movie/anime that does a really good job of at least mentioning that, and just overall being a fantastic zombie movie, is Zom 100, also called Bucket List of the Dead. And not to get into it too much, although it's just a really great zombie story about a guy who is living in a soulless job where he doesn't get a chance to do anything he's ever wanted to. The zombie apocalypse happens and then frees him to go do all the fun things he's ever wanted to do. But in that, ends up being stuck in this really horrible compound where they use zombies for security. They literally have a moat of zombies that they use to keep people out and also keep people in because these people are really horrible. And then, of course, as always happens, anytime you have zombies being kept in a zombie compound, they end up getting free, killing everyone, and it's all really horrible. So pretty much we can all just take away that in any case where it comes down to, if you ask yourself, should I keep this zombie? No, you shouldn't.
Almost definitely not. And I think overall, one of the final lessons we have listed here, very simply, is learn stuff. And I think that's covered by everything we just said. There's zombie survival guides out there. There are overarching ideas everywhere, and there's probably a reason for that. And the best lesson I can tell you is not only take these lessons, but learn other stuff. Learn to forage, learn to make your own medicine, learn to, not get bit.
Absolutely. This is such a great takeaway from this, because I actually have a story about my life that I want to share with this, of how zombie apocalypse literature and movies and such changed my life. Which, as I've always loved zombies because I've always thought they were cool, I read Max Brooks's Zombie Survival Guide, which Zombie Survival Guide is not a bad place to start if you kind of want to get a notion, but there's a ton of books out there. The Hand-to-Hand Zombie Survival Manual is really great, which also, like the Zombie Survival Manual by Max Brooks, is mostly just a bunch of short stories strung together with a bunch of really good survival information. I also have a book that I love called Cooking Through the Zombie Apocalypse, which is all sorts of survival cooking stuff mixed in with zombie stuff. So there's some really great resources for that stuff out there. But I've always loved that kind of media. Well, I at one point was talking with one of my friends about who would you want your zombie survival compound and what skills would you want them to have. And I started looking at myself and what skills I had. And I went, you know what? I don't have that many useful skills. I'm not sure I would want me in my zombie survival compound. And this was many, many years ago. And it actually sparked me to want to start learning things and doing things. Now, of course, all these years later, I have a lot of skills. I have foraging skills. I have gardening skills, homesteading type stuff, canning, preserving, cooking, all sorts of things. I honed all these skills over time. But what started it all was asking myself, would I be useful in the zombie apocalypse? And I really wouldn't have been. So it caused me to want to go out and learn these skills. The wonderful thing about learning all these skills that are very useful in the zombie apocalypse, martial arts, how to use a firearm, these are all things that are very, very useful in the zombie apocalypse and are also pretty good thing to know in our real world today.
Absolutely. And I asked myself the same question more recently, but I've always had a lot of weird skills that nobody's really sure why I have. And we're going to get to enrichment in a moment, but as you already know, I can play guitar. I don't think you've heard me sing before, but I have a lot of creative skills that would help with the enrichment half of things. I'm also very good with long firearms, particularly, and I'm very good at maintaining weapons. So I think probably my primary skill would be entertainer and gun guy.
I think that technically means you're a bard by D&D standards. Ranged weapons and entertainment.
I am more than okay with that. I didn't think about it, but I'm more than okay with it. That's what I'm going to say. I'm the zombie bard.
So we're actually going to get to these type of skills that are there for maintaining morale that are not what people normally think of as survival skills. But before we get to that, which all of those skills you're talking about where people don't normally think of them as survival skills, things like being able to sing, being able to play the guitar, they are incredibly important because they come to morale. And that's one of the things I want to talk about is morale, enrichment, and mental health in general, because that is so much more of an important factor of survival than most people give credit to.
100%. And we've seen it throughout history in natural situations too, like real life situations. And I'm going to let you talk about this because you told me this story and I'd never heard it before and I love it. Why don't you tell them about the ice cream barge?
Absolutely. One of the things that is absolute proof that morale and happiness and enrichment is more important than people realize is the fact that it's one of the main focuses of the U.S. military. Because whatever you may think of the U.S. military, it is really good at getting shit done. And in order to get shit done, it knows it needs to keep up the morale of the soldiers. And one of the best examples of this is a thing that happened in World War II, where there was a Japanese admiral being interviewed after World War II was over. And he was asked, because of course the Japanese lost World War II, spoilers in case you weren't aware of that. And one of the things they asked him is, hey, when did you know you were beat? When were you positive the Americans were going to win? He said, I knew we were beat when I learned about your damn ice cream barge. And they asked, what do you mean about the ice cream barge? And he says, well, the Japanese Navy was struggling to keep people fed. The big recruiting tool they had was offering unlimited white rice. The fact that you could eat as much rice if you wanted if you joined the military, because everything was being rationed horribly and people were starving. And so they were barely struggling to keep their soldiers fed. Meanwhile, cut to America, and we have an ice cream barge. This was originally a barge made to mix concrete, and it had three big concrete mixing containers built into this barge. Well, America had so many ships, we had so much concrete, we didn't really need this anymore. So instead, we took these concrete mixers and we turned them into giant ice cream makers. And then we would take this ice cream barge and we would sail it to anywhere where Americans were fighting so that frontline soldiers could have access to ice cream. Because it had three mixers, there were three flavors, which were vanilla, chocolate, and then whatever local tropical fruit they could source. So the military knew how important it was for people to be happy and have something to look forward to and to have this morale boost that they made an ice cream barge to get our frontline soldiers to be able to have a sweet treat. If that does not tell you how important morale is, I don't know what does.
And just imagine if they stopped by somewhere that had mangoes, they had mango ice cream.
Which, mangoes being a very common fruit in that area of the world, was very common. So can you just imagine you're sitting there in a foxhole fighting and suddenly some dude taps you on the shoulder and hands you a mango ice cream cone? That has got to make you feel better.
That would get me through the war, I'll be honest with you.
Now, we do see this talked about in various different media, whether it be zombie or not. Like, again, we talked about Quiet Place, which is not a zombie apocalypse, but it is an apocalypse. And, of course, in A Quiet Place, people can't make noise because the weird aliens hunt by sound. And we have a family, and we see them surviving. And one of the main things they do is they find ways to play games and entertain themselves, even though they have to be silent. So they find games they can play silently. And it's such a priority that they have that enrichment, that they have something to look forward to, that they make an entire point of finding games they can still play because it's so important to their survival to have this enrichment.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you this. Don't play Monopoly in A Quiet Place situation because I guarantee you I'll be screaming swear words left and right and we will all get killed.
As soon as Hatter does not pass go, does not collect $200, we're all going to die.
Precisely. Now, in most of these movies and most of these shows and most of these situations, pets are often a thing. Like, you know, in that unfortunate I Am Legend film, he had his dog. But what about cats?
See, I feel cats are a drastically underrated and underutilized part of the zombie apocalypse because they have a ton of advantages. One, pest control. Being able to control rats and roaches and bugs and things like that. Those are all things cats are fantastic at and would be more necessary than ever in a zombie apocalypse. There's also another factor because, of course, as we see in I Am Legend, the dog gets bit. That's a very sad scene. And we often see the dog get bit or killed by zombies. We see the horse in Walking Dead get bit by a zombie. But let me ask you a question, Hatter. You, as a able-bodied human, do you think you could catch a cat that didn't want you to catch it?
Well, let me answer your question with a story. My cat, Salem, the first time we brought him to the vet for his shots, did not like the idea of being there. At first, he was fine. At first, he was hanging out. He was, getting to know everybody. He's a very social cat. But strangely enough, the moment when he first became afraid was when the vet brought the scale out to weigh him. I cannot to this day figure out why he was so terrified of that scale, but he started running around the room like a maniac. It took three of us to corner him and catch him, and thankfully he doesn't bite or scratch in anger. He does playfully, which has led to some unfortunate situations. But he, despite not wanting to bite or scratch us, kept on squirming out, and finally we got him back on the table. Salem grabbed the corner of the table, and it took all three of us to pull him off the corner of the table. Now, even for a cat, he's abnormally strong, but if any cat is half of what he is, they're going to be fine.
And that's kind of the idea. And that was three able-bodied, mentally stable humans with a cat in an enclosed area, and you still almost couldn't catch him.
Mentally stable is debatable.
I maintain that no zombie, unless it's one of the really crazy, super fast mutant zombies, no shambler, no infected, is ever going to be able to catch a cat unless that cat is injured or trapped somewhere. So cats are going to be virtually immune to zombies, which does lead us to some fun things in addition to using them in the normal ways as companions, as pest control, which cats are great for entertainment. We talked about how important entertainment enrichment is. If you have a piece of string and a cat, you have an entire night's worth of entertainment as you make this thing do backflips chasing the string.
And the cat loves it too.
Absolutely. The cat loves it, you love it, and it's a way for us to both bond and help each other through the zombie apocalypse. But I will say one other thing that I actually thought about discussing this while we were making the outline, which is that I'm pretty sure you could train cats to be messengers between compounds, or use them kind of like homing pigeons, because again, the zombies are never going to be able to catch them. So tie a message to the cat, send them to your friends down the road. It's a completely safe way to get messages back and forth. You would require you training cats, but my cats know how to sit and stay and do a lot of dog commands because I'm weird like that. There's also a good friend of ours on TikTok, Matt Stash, who has taught his cat how to play the piano. So I'm pretty sure we could train messenger cats.
Honestly, I don't even have to train my cat. All I have to do is tie the message to him and have the friend down the street shake a box of treats. He'll get right over there. But yeah, I think cats are a great thing to have in the zombie apocalypse. And we just mentioned they have multiple purposes, and I think it's very important that anything you have in the zombie apocalypse, that you use it to its maximum efficiency, which means if it has another purpose, you should explore that purpose, and you should fully know how to use it for that purpose.
Absolutely. And animals, now we're talking about kind of a zombie survival compound where you've managed to settle down. If you're still nomadic and you're still running from the zombies, this isn't really what we're talking about. But assuming you are at kind of a stage where you're growing your own food, where you have animals, those animals are going to be a big part of your entertainment and enrichment too. There's actually a homesteader that I follow that one of his big things is he talks about your homestead should be able to provide all your needs. And when someone asked him, well, what about entertainment? It's not like you can grow movies or something like that. His response was, yeah, but have you ever sit on your porch and watched a chicken? Chickens are really freaking entertaining. And that's kind of the thing, being able to be in that moment, sit out on your porch, play the guitar, play the violin, watch your animals run around, watch chickens do goofy stuff, play with the string with your cat, play with fetch with your dog. That's going to provide so much of that enrichment and entertainment that's going to help give you a reason to get up in the morning. Being able to find those kind of things to do is going to be vital to your survival.
Yeah, plus, chickens have a dual purpose. They're also delicious.
They are delicious in two different ways. That whenever they are making eggs, the eggs are delicious, and when they are done making eggs, the chicken themselves is delicious.
Yeah, and let me tell you this. There's another lesson there for the chickens, too. You want to use anything that you have, whether be it a tool or a resource, to its maximum efficacy, meaning you don't want to eat a chicken before it's done laying eggs. You don't want to let a tool go to pot. You want to maintain your tools. This is all very important. You want to get everything you can out of everything you have.
Absolutely. One of the most important things is to not neglect any advantage that you might have. If you have an animal or you have a tool, you need to be thinking about every way that can possibly contribute to your survival.
If you have a pipe wrench, it's not only good as a pipe wrench, it's good for a lot of other things too. It could be a hammer. It could be something you use as a puppet to entertain yourself when your sanity is a little more drained to, maintain what you have left. And you can whack someone with it.
I will say there is an idea that I got from the game Fallout, which has its own elements of zombie survival in it, but was the idea of one of the weapons they have, which is a pipe wrench where they have taken heavy gear and clamped it into the jaws, basically making an impromptu flanged mace. And that seemed like a fantastic idea. We'll get to that a little bit more when we start talking about appropriate weapons for the zombie apocalypse, but that just mentioning a pipe wrench made me think of that, and that just seems like such a cool weapon.
Absolutely. So, we've covered a few things about enrichment, getting everything you can out of everything you own. What would your weapon of choice be?
If we're going to say weapon of choice as far as a melee weapon and not a firearm, because the firearms discussion is an entirely different one, I would have to say probably something like a machete. Either a machete, if we're going for more of a bladed weapon. For one, I definitely want a machete on me, both for killing zombies and for machete reasons. But I would also say that anything like a stick, so a staff, anything, especially something in the 6-foot range, like a bow staff, that's going to be almost my preference. So a machete and something like a bow staff, especially like a heavy oak staff, because people don't understand, one, it's so good for keeping distance. One, I'm trained in it. And two, the ease at which it will destroy a human skull is actually kind of remarkable. I used to have a channel where I actually did testing of various things for the zombie apocalypse. And one of the things I would do is get coconuts and watermelons and hit them with various things to see what would be good at taking out zombie skulls. And the staff just was absolutely dynamite. It obliterated every coconut I put it up against.
And I think you have the right idea there. Variety is important. So I'm going to say my melee weapons are going to be probably a bow staff. I'm going to start practicing with that a little bit. And certainly a machete. Because a machete it's just the perfect knife given the situation. Am I right or am I right?
You're absolutely right. I'm also going to throw out a really weird bit of information for anyone. If you, for some reason, whether it be zombie apocalypse related or just in general want to have a really good melee weapon for whatever reason, I will say that Cold Steel has a line of machete swords, which are basically machetes made for practical use that happen to be in the shape of various classic swords. Like they have one that's in the shape of a katana, one that's in the shape of a Roman gladius, one that's in the shape of a kukri, and they are the cheapest type of swords that are actually good for practical cutting that are out there. So I will say that's something to consider if you need you a good zombie machete. I personally have the Gladius, and I put it through its paces when I had the zombie channel, and it can do absolutely anything. It'll slice up watermelons, destroy coconuts. This would be an ideal zombie killer. So I have to say the Cold Steel machetes, no, they're not sponsoring us. If Cold Steel would like to sponsor us, we would be more than happy. But unfortunately, we are not sponsored. I just really like their product.
I'm a big fan too, but I am going to say this, just a little kind of asterisk. Make sure you go for function over form. So just because something looks cool doesn't mean it's a good weapon. Sometimes it's the ugliest thing in the world that you need to get by.
Absolutely. I would go ahead and throw this out there because, of course, anytime zombie survival gets brought up, there's always some weeb. I'm also a weeb. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying some weeb is going to say, oh, I have a katana that I bought at the mall for $20. Not understanding that katana, if you hit something with it, will literally explode in your hands. The blade will come off and it will stab you in the face. Don't ask me how I know. I'm just saying, make sure whatever you get is combat grade, is utility grade, and not a wall hanger. Wall hangers will kill you.
Just look for the phrase live blade. Live blade.
And that is so incredibly true, Hatter. Now that brings me to the idea, and I want to pose this question to you. What is going to be your ideal zombie loadout? Now, here's the question that I'm specifically asking. We're going to be talking about two kind of scenarios. One is where you are traveling, you're still trying to get to a safe place, so this is kind of your nomadic loadout. And then the other one is going to be you already have a compound and you're having to defend this compound, so this is going to be your heavier loadout. You're not wearing this all the time. The other one you've got to wear constantly. This one is just going to be an excursion. You're going out to defend the walls, whatever. And we're also going to start this discussion with non-firearms weapons. So we're going to be talking about more melee weapons. That's very important for a couple of reasons. One, because in the zombie apocalypse, ammo is scarce, so you need to have non-firearms options. For another reason, there are definitely people out there who live in places where firearms are just not prevalent. That was actually the whole thing with Shaun of the Dead being made in England, and them talking about we wanted to set it in England because otherwise firearms are such an integral part of the zombie apocalypse, and they just didn't want that. So it's important to remember not everybody has access to firearms. So what would be your long-range nomadic zombie loadout melee, and what would be your heavier defend your compound zombie apocalypse melee?
Okay, so if I'm traveling, of course, armor is always going to be important. We know that layers are our friend. And I'm going to go with, first of all, my outermost layer is going to be leather. Leather is extremely hard to cut or rip with, sharp things like teeth. Beneath that, if I can get it, I'm probably going to go with chainmail, but, not everyone has a chainmail hoodie sitting in their closet. I know some people out there do, and they're going to say so in the comments. But probably layers. I'd start with leather, maybe a hoodie or some kind of thick jacket underneath that. Same with the pants, leather pants and then denim underneath. That's going to be the same either way. I'm always going to try and keep myself from getting bit for obvious reasons. And I'm thinking something along the lines of, again, this is if I can get it, a good gas mask to cover the face. But chances are, we can't get that. So probably like a hockey mask or something like that. Just something to keep the splatter off of me. And as for weapons, they're going to be also the same either way, my melee weapons. A machete, because that's a good, reliable cutting weapon. And something long like a bow staff or even possibly a bat if I can't get my hands on something that's similar to a bow staff. Are we also talking about long-range weapons, or are we going to hold off on that?
Oh, let's hold off on that and just to stick to the melee. So that's your nomadic traveling lighter loadout, your scout loadout, if you will. So what's your juggernaut loadout that, again, you're only going to have to wear this while you are fighting zombies in an engagement? What are you going to wear now that you're defending your compound?
I'm going to say an extra layer, first of all, because if I don't have to be in it for very long, I can carry a heavier load and be a little warmer. So I'm going to say an extra layer just to keep the bites out. And honestly, if we're talking dumb shambling zombies, I'll have things lying around the compound too. So, like, my bow staff or my bat breaks. Oh, there's one sitting in the yard there. I'll grab that. Have things available to you. That's what I'm saying. If you're at your homestead, have things available. Think of every situation. Think, if I hang a golf club on this wall, would that do me some good? Or a crowbar or something like that. Basically, I would have things scattered about that I could use.
I do love that as an idea that is uniquely useful for the zombie apocalypse, because normally in self-defense, you don't want weapons just laying around because they can be used against you. Zombies are not generally smart enough to use weapons, so in a zombie survival situation, having weapons just at hand, literally everywhere, would be a massive advantage.
Get the fire pit machete. Mine just broke.
Get me my auxiliary machete.
And if that breaks, the auxiliary machete. And if that breaks, well, you're screwed. Because it'd be crazy to have anything beyond 3 auxiliaries, right?
It reminds me of the prepper mantra. 2 is 1, 1 is none, 3 is for me, 4 is more, 5 keeps you alive, and I always add 6 is a sure sign of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, OCD might save your life in this situation.
Absolutely. Zombie OCD, or rather, let me rephrase that. OCD in the zombie apocalypse is not insanity. It is a reasonable reaction to an unreasonable situation.
ZOCD.
That's another term we're adding to the lexicon.
Absolutely. Or SOCD if it's not zombie survival OCD. But we'll work on that when we write the dictionary. Now, one thing I'm going to say is some people like sledgehammers. Unless you're very, very strong, I'm not going to recommend a sledgehammer for 2 reasons. A, you got to be able to swing the thing. And 2, if you swing it back too far and you start losing your balance, what's going to happen? I'm going to tell you right now, if you're on the ground in a zombie situation, 9 out of 10 times, you're already dead. You may as well just spare yourself some pain, if you know what I mean.
Now, I will say, things like heavy hammers have absolutely been used in war. War mallets, that type of thing, have kind of been a thing, although they weren't very common because they're a very, very high skill level weapon. There actually were some Japanese weapons that were these bigger, heavier things, but they weren't common because even war hammers are not as heavy, the type of war hammers you normally see a knight using. The real ones were not anywhere near as heavy as a sledgehammer. So a part of the problem with sledgehammer is it's overkill. You actually don't need something that heavy in order to kill a zombie. I would actually say if you were to hand me a sledgehammer in a zombie apocalypse, I am going to cut the head off the sledgehammer and just use the handle, because that handle will absolutely destroy a zombie skull.
Yeah, and exactly. Remember what I said earlier, too. I said you want to use everything you have to its maximum utility. And if you can't use the full utility of something, it's pointless, i.e. a sledgehammer. If you can't use all that weight, it becomes a detriment. So all that being said, what would your loadout be, Gray? What are you going to have in either situation?
All right. I actually have some really interesting ideas on this one. For one, you're absolutely correct. Layers is always going to be your friend. So when I'm going more for my quote-unquote scout loadout, lighter layers are absolutely going to be where it's at. Again, when I was doing my zombie channel, one of the things I actually did, because a lot of people believe that just a single pair of Levi's, that just a layer of denim would protect them. So I tested it. I actually got a squash, I put a pair of blue jeans on it, and I bit it. And even me, with my human jaws, was more than able to bite, not technically tearing the Levi's, but I was able to bite into the squash through the denim, and that human would have 100% been infected. So layers were the thing. Actually, one of the most effective single quote-unquote layers, even though it has multiple layers, which is why it works, was something like a canvas jacket, like a Carhartt jacket. I also have like a pair of insulated Carhartt overalls that would work really good. So something like that would be definitely, if that's all I could get, I would use that. With something like a sweater or whatever under it would also be very useful. Although if I can, my go-to is going to be motocross gear. Anybody who's familiar with what motocross gear looks like, it is basically body armor. It's meant to be flexible. You have to be able to ride a motorcycle while you're using it. complete with helmet. The full motocross gear setup would be my pick if I could get my hands on it. Now, I will say one thing, that all armor, and always, this has always been true throughout history, as long as humans have worn armor, it's always a trade-off. And one of the biggest trade-offs is the fact that it's hot. I live in Texas. Hatter lives in New York. So he's more thinking about keeping warm. I'm thinking about keeping cool. So it's definitely going to be a struggle for me. The heavier armor I wear, the hotter it's going to be. But that may still be a trade-off I'm willing to make. So I'm definitely going to go for either something like Carhartt overalls, again, with that padding, as much padding as I can put under it, because that makes it harder for something to bite through. Motocross body armor is going to be my top pick. And as for weapons, again, I'm kind of going the same vibe as Hatter. The bow staff and the machete are going to be my friends. Now, I will say it is very easy to turn a bow staff into a spear. Another weapon I tested was literally taking a stick and duct taping a kitchen knife to it. I was shocked at how effective that was. I did not expect that to be a really good weapon, and it absolutely was. So a spear on the end of a bow staff, just literally any sharp thing, is a lot better than you think it's going to be. So weirdly, that's not a bad option. That's one of the things that makes a bow staff so flexible. Kind of the same thing Hatter was talking about. Be able to use the full utility of anything. Therefore, the flexibility becomes a major asset.
Exactly.
Now, I will say that my answer becomes a little bit different if I'm going to be just defending my homestead. For one, if I'm defending my homestead, motocross, again, I'm probably still keeping the motocross because as far as zombie survival, you can hardly beat that. Now, I will say, kind of circle back to my scout attire, Hatter mentioned the fact that a gas mask would be ideal. And if you can get a gas mask, it's excellent. Now, you can buy them off Amazon right now, but if you haven't bought one in preparation for the zombie apocalypse, you're probably not going to find one. I will say that you absolutely can make them out of a Coke bottle and various filtration methods. You can just Google how to make a Coke bottle gas mask. Those do work really well, but it's going to be a little delicate as in easy to get knocked off your face. You could actually probably do a lot worse than just wearing a bandana train robber style. That's actually going to do a lot to keep fluids off your face in case there's some splatter. I will say, unfortunately, I have not trained in armored combat. If there's anyone out there who's familiar with Boo-Hurt, SCA, and just other various things where people in the modern era wear knight's armor, full plate knight's armor, it's so cool to watch these guys go at it, and that armor would provide you almost 100% protection from zombies. But I will say, even if you could lay your hands on the armor, which these guys are surprisingly agile in it, so it's not like it makes them super slow, but it does require that you have the training and the endurance to wear it, which I do not. So while I would love to have a Boo-Hurt guy, a HEMA guy in my compound, I ain't him, so unfortunately I will not be wearing full plate armor. But I will say that if I couldn't get the full motocross gear, I would probably go for something more of like a pieced together version of that, where I'm having a base layer like the insulated overalls with things like wood, metal, or just doubled thick leather used kind of as piecemeal plate in all the places where zombies are likely to bite you. Because remember, you're not really likely to be bit on the stomach, so you can actually afford to be a little less armored there. You're very likely to be bit on the arms, be bit on the legs, be bit on the shoulders, probably on the neck area, head area. Those are places a zombie is going to be targeting. It's kind of unlikely that you're going to get bit on the ass, although that's not impossible, so maybe wear a little bit of butt armor.
Oh, imagine that's the way you go out. You go out, imagine going out like that. You got bit on the rear end. You know, I would not let anybody live or die that down if they were in my homestead.
Wouldn't you hate to be remembered as the guy who sat on a zombie?
Sat on a zombie's face.
That's an entirely different kink, which brings me to a really weird concept. There's a lot of ways to get infected by a zombie. You can get bitten by them. We actually talked about you have the danger if you're killing zombies, you can get blood splatter in your mouth, and that could get you infected. For some reason, because I know you weirdos are out there, we have to talk about the fact that, yes, you could get zombieism transmitted to you if you try to have sex with a zombie. I would love to say that that's not something I need to recommend against because no one would ever do it, but there are plenty of people out there who are that weird. So I will say that I probably do need to warn you not to have sex with the zombies, although if I have to warn you not to have sex with the zombies, you're probably not going to listen to me anyway.
Does that count as necrophilia?
I'm not sure if that's necrophilia, bestiality, or just plain wrong. I'm kind of leaning towards just plain wrong.
Necrobestiality? No, that would be a different thing. You know what? We'll come up with a word for the dictionary and I'll make a short about it. But I'll say there's a lot of strange people out there, no judgment, but you're not coming into my compound with that attitude.
Normally, I would say no kink shame, but no, in this case, kink shame all the way.
It's just unsafe. A zombie can't have a safe word.
Zombie is by definition the most unsafe word I can think of.
That or mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise would be incredibly unsafe in the zombie apocalypse because you don't have the refrigeration necessary to make it safe.
It's also a great word for that situation because it's immediately going to shut me up. I don't know how people eat mayonnaise. Anyway, putting all of that aside, yeah, don't go fornicating with zombies, guys. So, what else do we have to say on this matter?
Well, actually, on the subject of loadouts, now that we've covered our melee, we've covered our armor, we've covered how not to get infected, we can talk a little bit about the fact that firearms are a fact of life for a lot of countries, including here in America, which means they are going to be a very useful tool for the zombie apocalypse. So, let me ask you, Hatter, what is your firearm loadout? We're not going to split it up the same way. Just in general, what firearms do you feel are going to be the most useful for zombies?
First and foremost, get really good at using a bow for the following reasons. One, it's quiet. So given a situation where you have to destroy zombies or a situation where you unfortunately may have to take out another few humans, stealth is your friend. A bow is probably the most stealthy thing you can use. Second, remember when I said use anything you get to its maximum utility? What can you do with an arrow when you pull it out of a creature's head?
You can reuse it if it's still in good condition.
Exactly. And if it's not in good condition, you can restore it to good condition. That's actually a skill that I have that would make me very useful in anybody's zombie situation. I also know how to create an arrow. And much like with long arms, I'm very good with a bow. Now, I'm not a competition winner with a bow because I've never entered one, but I have a few times impressed some of my fellow gun lovers in my family by actually shooting an arrow through another arrow. Just to clarify, not while the arrow was in the air when it was already in a target. I'm not that good. On purpose.
Well, and something else I will say is that if you start now and start practicing with a bow, you have time to get really good with a bow. And a bow, if you have the skills, is an incredibly useful weapon. I will say, don't discount a crossbow, which is much easier to pick up and easier to start learning, and is still very effective. Now, of course, crossbows versus bows have all their own advantages and disadvantages, and we won't belabor that too much. Just to say that both are very valid options for various reasons in the zombie apocalypse and are both going to have some big advantages when it comes to taking out zombies.
If it's me, if we're asking about my loadout, I'm going with a bow because a bow is much easier to load. Crossbow, if you have distance, a crossbow, well, either one gets you about the same, if not better distance on a bow, depending on the crossbow that you have. If you can keep your distance, that's not a huge deal breaker when it comes to the crossbow. But still, again, you can load a bow a lot faster. It's not even really loading. It's just pulling the arrow out of your quiver and getting it in there. The other long-range weapon I'm going to have is a solid rifle. Now, really, I'm not mega picky. Like if I'm competition shooting or I'm just shooting for fun, I prefer a bolt action. There's a kind of, what's the word? A kind of satisfaction to getting the rhythm of that right. And in fact, if you're good with a bolt action rifle and you can do that nice and quick, and I am, and I can, you will save a lot of ammo. Because if you have a semi-auto, sometimes on reflex, if you miss, you want to overcorrect and fire a few extra bullets. So I would say a bolt action is great for conserving ammo. And if you attack from a distance, as one with any brain cells in their head would with a long-range weapon, I'm going to say bolt action. Final answer, Regis.
Well, and there actually is study done that does indicate that people who are having to take that extra action to work a bolt are more accurate than people who just are firing a semi-auto and just have to pull the trigger, because it forces you to take your time and think about your shot. So there's definitely like good, solid evidence to the fact that that's a good pick.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be my choice. I'm going to say a good bolt action rifle and a bow. And I've never, hilariously enough, I've been talking about how I'm a gun nut. I've never fired a pistol before in my life. But if I was going to choose a handgun of some kind, it would definitely be a revolver, because I know it can only hold 6 shots. but it's not going to jam on you. The worst thing that can possibly happen if all you have is your pistol is that it jams on you. Because once again, not only do you not have a functioning weapon, but you're going to panic. And reloading a revolver is a little bit quicker than trying to jam that clip into the bottom of a semi-automatic pistol, because you can miss, you can drop it. And I suppose the same could happen with a revolver, but it's not all or nothing. If you get 2 or 3 of those bullets in, you got some workable weapons. If you drop that clip, that's all your ammo on the ground.
Now, I will say I am more of a pistol guy. And so kind of going into my loadout, one thing that I will say is that absolutely having something reusable like a bow or a crossbow, and for me, I have some skill with a bow. I'm possibly not as skilled with a bow, but either a bow or crossbow are going to feel like really good options for me to have. That way you at least have that quieter option, assuming I can carry it, assuming this is all going in the zombie survival pickup truck or whatever, and I'm not just having to carry it all on my back. I definitely want that option as well as my firearms. I will talk about the long arms, but to mention the stuff you were talking about the pistols, I will say that traditionally with most trained shooters, they will say that it is much faster to reload a semi-auto, because if you train in how to reload that clip, it's really, really fast. Now, one interesting thing, again, I love revolvers. Revolvers are great. Ideally, I would have a primary semi-automatic sidearm and then a backup revolver. So ideally, you'd want both. They're both good. I will say that if you are going to use a revolver, please buy a speed loader for your revolver. Now, if this is the zombie apocalypse and you've scavenged it, that may not be an option. But if you're getting one now, because anyone who has ever tried to reload a revolver under duress, which I have because my father-in-law, back when I was learning how to shoot, had me, because I was carrying a revolver at the time, and he had me, okay, hand me a handful of shells and tell me to try to load them while yelling at me and untiming me and trying to get me to do it really quickly, versus sticking a speed loader in, which if you're not familiar with the speed loader, it's a little device that holds all the bullets, you stick it in, twist it, and lets the bullets go. So it makes loading a revolver a lot faster. So if you have a revolver and you have the option of having a speed loader, from my experience, they're a great thing to have. I'm a Glock guy. I like Glock. Glocks are the Toyota of guns. They always work. They're very reliable. So I know some people don't like them. I love them. So that would definitely be my pick in whatever caliber you think is going to be most prevalent. I live in America. 9mm super common. It's the caliber used by the military. So it's very likely for you to have that. Kind of in that same vein, my rifle, I want something that's going to shoot a very common caliber, and a very common caliber, again, is a military caliber, so something in the 5.56 223 family. And for people who may not be as familiar with guns, that's kind of the bullet that is shot by your classic assault rifle, M16, AR-15, that kind of thing. Now, I'm actually not picking a classic assault rifle. I'm actually picking a Ruger Mini 14, which, if you're familiar with the semi-automatic 22, the Ruger 1022, which is possibly the most popular 22 rifle ever created, it's basically the version of that shoots a 223. So that would probably be my pick. It has really good range. It's not crazy long range, but then again, I'm not a sniper. I'm not a super long range shooter. I am decently accurate at decent range, and that gun will be able to hit anything that I can hit. So I feel like that's a great. Now, it is semi-automatic. So I am going with a slightly different take than Hatter here, who is going for the slower, more accurate shots. But that's why it's great to have people in your compound who have different strengths and different weaknesses. With this loadout, I'm going to be better at close-up, faster shots, whereas he's going to be a lot better at longer range, more accurate, slower shots.
I'm also very good at staying calm under duress, so I think I am better off as the sniper.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I think when you're talking about firearms and zombies that's worth mentioning, because everyone wants to talk about shotguns. And shotguns can be very good against zombies in very specific scenarios. If I was clearing a building and I knew there were zombies in there, shotguns have a lot of value in this scenario because they will take a zombie's head completely off of its shoulders. Now, if you're very far away, they begin to lose that ability and they're no longer have that complete decapitation ability. But in close indoor ranges, they are going to completely decapitate a zombie, because there is always a danger that if we shoot a zombie in the head with a 9mm or a 22 or a 223, These smaller bullets might enter the skull and destroy the brain really well. There's the classic theory that a 22 will enter the brain, or enter the skull, but not exit it, bounce around in the brain and do lots of damage. And it might not. So there's a danger with any other bullet that we shoot a zombie in the head with. It might not do a good enough job of destroying the brain. Whereas with a shotgun, there is no question. There will be no more zombie head. So they have that advantage of guaranteed kill at short range. So shotguns definitely have a place when it comes to taking out zombies.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to say about shotguns that a lot of people don't think of, splatter.
Absolutely. But that's actually worth mentioning because whether we're talking about a shotgun, whether we're talking about a rifle, whether we're talking about a pistol, whether we're talking about a mace, a crowbar, a baseball bat, whatever, splatter, again, if you're close enough to the zombie, is a massive problem. So something to keep in mind. That's why whenever we're talking about the armor, we're also talking about basically you need to have a built-in hazmat suit in your armor.
Precisely. Now, on the subject of shotguns, there's a historical shotgun I love, and we talked about it. This isn't so much zombie-related as it is the fact that I'm kind of a gun nerd. We talked about this writing the outline. You know what I'm talking about here?
Absolutely. We're talking about the original World War II Remington that you can slam fire.
I love the idea of slam firing. And again, it's more of just, it's cool, and it's probably not what I would use. But I'll explain how slam firing works. The way slam firing works is the way that that particular shotgun is constructed. Once you pump it and fire, if you hold down that trigger and pump again, you can basically just pump, 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 boom, 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 boom. And this thing was so effective, they called it the trench broom. So effective that Germany, remember who Germany was in World War II, was saying, this is cruel, this is unfair, you need to stop letting them use these in the trenches. That's how effective it was, and frankly, it's just cool.
And the trench shotguns even saw use as far back as World War I. So absolutely, trench shotguns were fantastic. Now, most modern shotguns won't slam fire like he's describing because it's generally seen as a safety issue, and rightfully so. And probably for zombies, we don't need rate of fire, we need accuracy. So, as he said, while you might not want to use it for zombies, the fact that it exists is just super cool.
I want to fire one day. I've never gotten to. I've worked with shotguns, but a slam firing shotgun, it's a dream weapon for me to try out.
Which brings up actually an interesting thing to point out, is that even if you have access to a fully automatic firearm, a fully automatic firearm is not going to be ideal for most zombies. Now, I say most because we have discussed that there are different kinds of zombies, and there is such a thing as the infected zombies that are just like normal humans. For those, sure, something with a fully automatic where you just need to spray a whole bunch of bullets at them, and if they catch even a few bullets, they're probably going to go down, would work, although even then they tend to be very resilient. You're going to need good, clean kill shots. But in general, for the head and dead type zombies, the zombies where you need to destroy the brain in order to kill them, you're going to need something you can accurately hit them in the head, and a fully automatic firearm is really, really bad at that. So I'm going to say that even if you have access to fully automatic firearms, they are probably not your friend in the zombie apocalypse, not even to mention how wasteful of ammo they are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I mentioned earlier conservation and using things to the maximum utility. If you're firing bullets and those bullets aren't killing zombies, you may as well not even have those bullets.
Absolutely. Conservation of ammo is going to be really huge. That's why whenever we first started talking about weapons loadouts, we started with your non-firearms weapons, because ideally, if anytime you are killing zombies, if you can do it without having to expend ammo, you're probably better off.
Precisely. Now, okay, so we've talked about our firearm choices. I still want to say I really want a slam firing shotgun, but no good in the zombie apocalypse. So I think that the two of us, if we survive the initial wave, I think we'll be okay. What do you think?
I think we will. We're bringing a lot of fun skills to the table, including I actually have a lot of foraging skills, a lot of herbal medicine skills. Back when I was doing my zombie channel, I actually had a thing where I would go through walking through the woods and talk about the different plants I would encounter and what things they were useful for, which ones were edible, which ones could be used for a mosquito repellent. That's actually one we have around here called an American Beauty plant, an American Beauty berry specifically, and you use the leaves, not the berries, to make a mosquito repellent. So I feel like the weird mishmash of skills we have would be very useful in a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, I feel like with the foraging thing, if the grid was still up, it would be me a message. You say, "Hey, Gray, can I eat this?" And you'd probably be like, "No, do not eat that." And I'd be like, "Oh."
You would be like, "Wow, okay, next time I'll check before I eat it." Got you.
But I do have some degree of knowledge, in all seriousness, in what I can and can't eat. But having somebody who knows basically all of it, it opens up a lot of options for food. And I'm a big guy. I like my food.
I will say that especially if we're in the environment there where I live, I'm really versed on what we have. I could make you a nice salad. You'd be great.
I just said I'm a big guy. What makes you think I'm going to eat a salad?
Because it's what we'll have. You're going to have venison and you're going to have salad and you're going to like it.
I do like venison. Okay, you know what? I can live with that. As long as there's meat.
Some nice dandelion greens, a venison side, definitely bacon. Bacon's going to be on the table every night. Anybody out there who doesn't know, I'm in Texas, and we have a giant wild pig problem here in Texas. So you will have more of a problem of the pigs trying to eat you than of trying to figure out how you're going to eat the pigs. So basically, as long as you can keep them from killing you, you will be eating pork. So you're going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm going to try to find my way there in the zombie apocalypse situation. It's winter most of the year here, and most of the animals die.
We actually have very, very mild winters. The summers absolutely suck, and it's so humid you have to worry about a lot of diseases and parasites. But in general, you're not going to have a trouble finding something to eat. I mean, for one, I live near the coast. I'm actually just south of Houston. So not only do we have pigs, not only do we have deer, squirrel, rabbits, we also have every kind of fish, shellfish, crawfish, crab. I mean, if you stick a piece of string in the water with something that looks like a hook on it, something's going to bite it. So you're not going to have any trouble finding food down here.
Good to know. Good to know. Then again, in the winter time, the winter keeps the particularly ferocious animals away, and I don't do well in the heat. I don't know. This is stuff to think about while we're not recording a professional podcast. But
absolutely.
I want to thank you for joining us on Liminal Radio. I'm the Hatter.
And I'm Gray. Thank you for joining us on the Station Between Stations, where we follow horror down every rabbit hole.